Imagine this. You've always been told that the Celts were the ancient, proud natives of Britain, the warriors who painted themselves blue. They built hill forts and fiercely resisted the Romans across the ancient landscape of Britain. But what if geneticists have now proven they were never truly native at all? The very idea of Celtic Britain as some unbroken indigenous saga is a myth completely rewritten by ancient DNA. Stick with me, because today we're diving deep into one of the most explosive archaeological and genetic revelations of our time. By the end of this, you'll see Britain's story not as a simple tale of one people. Instead, it's a dramatic saga of migrations, replacements, and cultural transformations that still shape who we are today. And trust me, the twists get wilder the further back we go. Let's start at the very beginning, because to understand why the Celts weren't native, we have to meet the people who were there first. Around 15,000 years ago, as the ice sheets retreated after the last ice age, small bands of hunter-gatherers crossed into Britain. At that time, Britain was still connected to the European mainland by a land bridge called Doggerland. One of the most famous early Britons is Cheddar Man, whose skeleton was found in a cave in Somerset. His DNA, sequenced in 2018, revealed something shocking. He had dark skin, possibly the color of modern Africans or South Asians. He also had bright blue eyes and dark curly hair. He was not some fair-skinned proto-Celt. He was a Western hunter-gatherer, part of a population that had survived the brutal conditions of the harsh tundra. These early inhabitants lived in small groups, hunting deer, gathering plants, and fishing along Britain's ancient coastlines. Their genetic signature is still faintly detectable in modern Britons, but it's tiny, maybe 10% or less in some places. Why so little? Because much bigger waves of change were coming to reshape the entire population. Fast forward to around 4000 BC. New people arrived from continental Europe, bringing farming, domesticated animals, and pottery with them. They also brought monumental construction, including the early phases of Stonehenge, transforming the British landscape forever. These Neolithic farmers descended mostly from early European farmers who had originated in Anatolia, in what is now modern Turkey. They spread across Europe and largely replaced the hunter-gatherers. Studies show up to 90% population turnover in some regions. They cleared forests, built causewayed enclosures, and created an entirely new way of life across Britain and beyond. But even these Neolithic farmers weren't the ancestors of the Celts we talk about. Their dominance would soon face a dramatic end. Here's where the story truly explodes. Around 2500 BC, a new culture swept into Britain called the Bell Beaker people. Named for their distinctive, upside-down, bell-shaped pottery, they brought metalworking and entirely new burial practices to Britain. Instead of collective tombs, they used single graves under round barrows, and they brought a massive genetic shift with them. A landmark 2018 study published in Nature analyzed ancient DNA from hundreds of skeletons and revealed something absolutely jaw-dropping. Within just a few centuries, about 90% of Britain's Neolithic genetic ancestry was completely replaced by incoming Bell Beaker people. The incoming Beaker folk carried steppe ancestry, DNA linked to Yamnaya pastoralists from the Pontic-Caspian steppe in Eastern Europe. In Britain, this wasn't a gentle blending. It was a profound and dramatic population turnover, unlike anything seen before. The Y chromosome haplogroup, R1b, almost absent in Neolithic Britain, suddenly shot to over 90% dominance across the island. Recent research points strongly to the Low Countries around modern Netherlands, Belgium, and northern France as their continental origin point. From there, These steppe ancestry migrants crossed the English Channel and transformed Britain's population almost completely. This replacement explains why modern Britons are genetically closer in many ways to continental Europeans than to the pure Neolithic farmers. The Beaker people transformed Britain forever, introducing bronze tools, woolly sheep, and entirely new social hierarchies to the island. But were they the Celts? Not quite. The Celtic languages and full Celtic cultural package actually came later. Jump to the Middle to Late Bronze Age, roughly 1300 to 800 BC. Another significant migration hit southern Britain. A major Harvard-led study in 2021 found evidence of large-scale movement from what is now France into Britain. These migrants contributed around 50% of the ancestry found in Iron Age people of England and Wales. This wave carried higher levels of early European farmer ancestry, making them genetically similar to ancient French populations of that era. Crucially, this timing aligns perfectly with linguistic evidence for the arrival or strengthening of early Celtic languages in Britain. Specifically, this relates to the Brittonic branch of Celtic languages spoken by the ancient Britons of the Iron Age period. Professor David Reich and colleagues noted this challenges the Old Celtic from the East idea of a mass Iron Age invasion. Instead, this Bronze Age pulse of migrants from France makes far more linguistic and genetic sense for the spread of Celtic. For centuries, historians imagined waves of Celtic invaders sweeping in from Central Europe during the Iron Age around 500 BC. They were thought to have brought Latin art, iron weapons, and a fierce warrior culture with them into Britain. But modern genetics and archaeology now tell a very different and far more complex story about Celtic origins in Britain. A groundbreaking 2015 Oxford University study mapping the genetics of over 2,000 Britons found no single Celtic genetic group anywhere. People in Scotland, Wales, Cornwall, and Ireland, the so-called Celtic fringes, are actually genetically quite different from each other. The Cornish are actually closer genetically to the English than they are to the Welsh, which surprises many people. There simply isn't a unique Celtic genetic signature shared across these areas. Celtic appears to be primarily a linguistic and cultural label. Barry Cunliffe and others champion the Celtic from the West theory, suggesting Celtic identity developed along the Atlantic facade during the Bronze Age. Ancient DNA from the first millennium AD shows remarkable genetic continuity in many parts of Britain right through Roman times. Most individuals from Roman Britain cluster genetically with Iron Age locals with limited continental input despite the presence of Roman legions. The people the Romans called Britons spoke Celtic languages, but their deepest genetic roots were a complex and layered mix. No population in Britain is truly native in the sense of being there since the Ice Age without major replacement. By the Iron Age, from 800 BC to 43 AD, Britain was a patchwork of tribes covering the entire landscape. These included the Catuvelauni, Iceni, Brigantes, and many more, each with their own territories, customs, and identities. Hill forts dotted the landscape, trade flourished with the continent, and proto-towns called oppida began to emerge across Britain. Genetics show continuity from the Bronze Age populations, with that key French-linked migration solidifying the Celtic linguistic sphere across Britain. What's clear from DNA is that there was no massive Iron Age population replacement. The big genetic shifts happened much earlier. This challenges romantic Victorian notions of pure Celtic bloodlines, heroically resisting foreign invaders across the ancient British landscape. The story doesn't stop with the Celts. Romans brought Mediterranean, North African, and Middle Eastern individuals, visible in some urban ancient DNA. Then came the Anglo-Saxon migrations after Rome's withdrawal, adding substantial Northern European ancestry up to 30 or 40% in some models. Vikings added Scandinavian genetic input, strongest in the north and east of Britain, leaving a lasting mark on the population. Normans brought French influence, but genetically their impact was more elite and limited compared to the earlier mass migrations. Throughout history, Western Britain, including Wales, Cornwall, Scotland, and Ireland, retained more of the earlier Bronze Age and Iron Age genetic profile. Yet even today, the majority of British ancestry traces back to those prehistoric migrations rather than any historical period. This genetic revolution forces us to rethink identity. The Celts of Britain weren't a pure indigenous race holding these islands forever. They were the result of multiple migrations, cultural fusions, and adaptations, just like almost every population on Earth today. It humanizes history and shows Britain as a crossroads, not an isolated fortress untouched by the wider movements of ancient peoples. It explains linguistic puzzles, like why Celtic languages are closer to those in Gaul than expected from a super-ancient split. New studies from the Francis Crick Institute, analyzing over 1,000 genomes, continue to refine this picture of dynamic ancient migration. This isn't unique to Britain. Similar population turnovers happened across Europe with farming, steppe migrations, and later continental movements. What makes Britain special is the island effect. Migrations were noticeable, but sometimes more filtered by the surrounding sea. The Atlantic zone shared genetic and cultural threads, stretching all the way from Iberia to Scotland, supporting maritime Celtic development ideas. Not everyone agrees on every detail. Some emphasize cultural diffusion over migration for explaining the spread of Celtic languages across Europe. But the overwhelming consensus from peer-reviewed ancient DNA studies is clear. Major population changes occurred throughout Britain's prehistoric past. The classic Celtic invasion narrative from Central Europe during the Iron Age simply does not hold up to genetic scrutiny. The Celts, as we label them, emerged in a Britain already transformed by earlier continental arrivals. They weren't the original natives. Modern Britons carry this layered history in their DNA, showing mixtures of British, Western European, and Scandinavian ancestry in commercial tests. It fosters humility about identity. No group has exclusive claim to nativeness beyond just a few thousand years of occupation. It enriches appreciation for Britain's diverse past, from dark-skinned hunter-gatherers to bronze-wielding migrants and Celtic-speaking Iron Age tribes. The revelation that the Celts were products of migration, not eternal natives, doesn't diminish their legacy at all. It makes it richer. It shows resilience, adaptation, and remarkable cultural innovation amid constant waves of change sweeping across the British Isles. Britain's story is one of constant reinvention, from the first footsteps after the Ice Age to the DNA in your own cells. It's a tale of movement and mixture, of peoples and cultures colliding, blending, and creating something entirely new across every generation. If you enjoyed this deep dive, smash that subscribe button, like the video, and drop a comment down below. What surprised you most? Do you have Celtic ancestry? Let's discuss it all in the comments section below. Thanks for watching until the very end. Stay curious about the past, because it's the key to understanding ourselves. See you next time.